Okay, Peter, we've just finished the Ming.
We finished the Ming and the Yuan. We finished part 5.
We finished part 5. And I'm reminded when I look over these new modules that you've done on the Ming. When I was in college, I took a course that dealt very briefly with China, but it dealt almost exclusively with the Ming period as the example of what traditional Chinese civilization was. And it showed a picture of an empire that had indeed expelled the Mongols, built the Great Wall, and built itself into a defensive corner, as it were, of the world. That is to say, isolated itself from the world. The Great Wall was earlier on, and by earlier generations of Chinese thinkers, seen to be not a symbol of national strength, but of defensiveness and of self-enclosure. The Zheng He voyages were seen as, yes, of course, they were exciting and they went abroad, but the court didn't believe in them long enough to continue, and China went back, retreated into itself. Pirates, what we would call traders today, on the China coast were forbidden, and so withdrawing from foreign trade. These are the images of a Zhongguo that was really Central Kingdom mentality, of a China with a Central Kingdom mentality, isolated from the world. And this image of the Ming was very powerful in China in the early 20th century as people sought to explain how the West had roared ahead and China seemingly had fallen apart. And yet this is not at all our view, your view, but our collective view of how we can think of this great empire today.
That's right. You know, there's a reason why we call this section from global empire to global economy, because the Mongols represent, I think, sort of the last really great global empire in world history that extended over, what, 3/4 of the Eurasian landmass. And we end up in the Ming with the beginning of the modern economy, when the discovery of the New World, the Americas, the movement of American silver to Europe, but also to China, the sea as the new routes, right? The sea routes that link every part of the world together. By the end of the 16th century, that China has become a full participant at that point in a global economy.
The other thing that the Ming gave birth to is the concept, or at least some concepts, that would later be described as Oriental despotism.
Ah, yes.
The idea of the all-powerful emperor, no one dares criticize him. The idea that this was another factor holding China back.
I think that we see in the early Ming, certainly with Juanzhang, the founder, a man who, on one hand, identifies strongly with the common people in a way that no previous emperor did, but on the other hand is deeply distrustful of his bureaucrats and is willing to use extra legal punishments and be quite autocratic when it came to his bureaucrats. But as the Ming sort of stabilizes, and it really takes around 100 years before the economy starts to recover from the civil wars and various policy mistakes that the early Ming made, economic policy mistakes. And the economy begins to recover in the 16th century, end of the 15th century. And although there's an attempt to maintain the world outside, there is, I mean, the closed off part is real. There is an aspect of Ming politics which is about closing off the world, bury our head in the sand sort of thing. But in fact, the Chinese economy didn't allow it, and the traders didn't allow it. You know, here's a really interesting thing. The Spanish get to Manila in the 1570s. By 1600, there are probably 30,000 Chinese in Manila actively engaged in trading with the Spanish. And we had a text, I think
I once bought a wonderful piece of Ming porcelain in Manila.
Oh, wow. You still have it?
I do.
We'll take a photograph of it.
Okay.
We have a wonderful text from a Spaniard who's basically gives this long, long list of all different kinds of goods. They all come from China. So China is an exporter of goods, of manufacture. It's an importer of silver, particularly. It has this great lust for silver. But it's also a place where the Jesuits are able to come, and the Dominicans and the Franciscans, and the Jesuits actually persuade some very highly placed officials of the learning of heaven, the learning of heaven Christianity, and the learning of heaven science, the learning about the heavens, one might say. Astronomy and other areas of scientific knowledge, mathematics, and there's a great Chinese interest already in mathematics at that point. We may go overboard in stressing China's openness to the world and engagement with the world in response to this older view we were talking about. but it's certainly not a simple view of China being closed. That won't work anymore. This is the moment when China appears in the West. As Matteo Ricci writes in his diaries, he says, well, this is a place where if the kings are not philosophers, at least the kings are surrounded by philosophers, which, if you recall from Plato's Republic,
sure.
is the highest achievement of a civil government. The only way the Mongols could conceive of the world was something that they had to dominate. They had to create an empire. Participation in the global economy becomes another way that countries become integrated with each other. And I think that's perhaps, in some sense, a very modern story, too.
Well, you know, there's one other thing that I learned in this course that got me interested in China as a young man, was that here was the Ming kind of quintessentially Chinese dynasty. The view of Sun Yat-sen, also later in the 20th century. Surrounded at the beginning, preceded by the Mongols, followed by the Manchus, barbarian dynasties, and yet barbarian dynasties that would be Sinicized. Basically, they really all became Chinese.
Right.
Well, that really, they could rule China through Chinese means, in fact. But I don't think one could today look back and say that of the Mongols. And I think when Professor Elliott is here, we're going to see that the Manchus are not just Chinese, and they don't just become Chinese. They are a different ruling house, much more successful and much more enduring
than the Mongols. Yes, absolutely. And so one of the questions I think we should have for Professor Elliott is, why was that? Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.